At 23:35 on November 14, 1942, radar operators in USS Washington's plot room observed green phosphorescent traces appearing on their SG radar screens. These traces indicated the approach of Japanese warships commanded by Vice Admiral Kondo, who would reach firing range within 30 minutes. Rear Admiral Willis Lee, a 54-year-old Olympic shooting champion and the United States Navy's leading expert on radar technology, was in charge of the American task force. Over the past 2 years, Lee had persistently advocated for the revolutionary potential of radar to senior naval officers who doubted its reliability and complexity, preferring traditional methods like searchlights and visual identification that had been used for centuries. However, Lee recognized a critical disparity. While Japanese ships lacked functional fire control radar and relied entirely on optical rangefinders and trained lookouts with exceptional night vision, American vessels equipped with radar could detect, track, and engage targets invisible to the naked eye. This technological edge was set to determine the outcome of the Battle for Guadalcanal. The stakes were incredibly high. For 3 months, American Marines had been fighting to maintain a tenuous hold on Guadalcanal, an unfamiliar tropical island known mainly through aerial reconnaissance that revealed a partially constructed Japanese airfield. On August 7, 1942, the Marines landed and captured this field, which they renamed Henderson Field in honor of Marine aviator Elliot Thorndike Henderson, who died at Midway. Control of Henderson Field became crucial for controlling the airspace around Guadalcanal, making it a focal point of one of the most intense campaigns in military history. Dominance of the airspace translated into dominance over the maritime approaches. Dominance over these approaches provided the capability to sustain and bolster ground troops. The Japanese were acutely aware of this strategic relationship. They had relentlessly targeted Henderson Field for several months with bombers dispatched from rebel during daylight hours, complemented by warships that bombarded the field at night. American defenders fought tenaciously to protect the airfield, deploying patched up planes against a formidable adversary and conserving ammunition while interring their fallen comrades amidst sweltering tropical conditions. The conflict had already claimed thousands of lives on both sides. Naval engagements surrounding the island were especially brutal. The waters north of Guadalcanal earned the ominous moniker Ironbottom sound due to the numerous sunken vessels that dotted its sea after night battles. American cruisers such as Vincennes, Quincy, and others sank during the Battle of Savo Island in August. Additional ships met their fate in October and early November. Floating bodies and oil slicks stretching for miles marked the sites where ships had been destroyed or set ablaze. The pervasive stench of death permeated the area. Admiral Lee's objective was to ensure that Henderson Field did not join the list of devastated targets. However, this depended on flawless performance by radar operators. It hinged on his ability to rely on electronic systems rather than personal judgment and experience. Furthermore, it required his crew to swiftly interpret patterns displayed on illuminated screens and convert them into precise firing solutions to save 200 American sailors from being obliterated by Japanese artillery fire. The Washington's radar operators had undergone intensive training since the ship entered the Pacific Theater in September 1942, arriving at Tonga on September 14th. The SG surface search radar technology was so recent that formal Navy training programs were still under development and refinement. Initial deployment of SG radars aboard ships occurred only in April 1942, a mere 7 months prior. Rathon and other contractors were installing production models on ships as quickly as they could manufacture them. Operators learned their craft by studying technical manuals written by engineers who lacked practical maritime experience, and by gaining hands on practice during convoy escort missions protecting marine reinforcements destined for Guadalcanal. The SG radar marked a significant advancement in naval technology. It operated at 10-centimeter microwaves within the S-band frequency range around 3 JAs. This was considerably more precise than the older CXAM air search system, which was mounted on Washington's main mast and used wavelengths of 1.5 meters. The longer wavelength of the CXM system made it excellent for detecting aircraft over long distances, but its returns from surface targets were fuzzy and imprecise in comparison to those generated by the SG radar. Due to its shorter wavelength, the SG produced sharp, distinct returns capable of identifying individual ships. Under optimal conditions, with calm seas and clear skies, the SG could detect large surface targets such as battleships at a distance of 18,000 yards, more than 10 miles away. It was also able to track multiple contacts simultaneously, displaying each one as a unique green phosphorescent blip on its circular cathode ray tube screen. Perhaps most importantly, the SG could function in total darkness and heavy rain, conditions that rendered Japanese optical equipment nearly ineffective. Despite the Japanese lookouts' exceptional night vision, honed through rigorous training and diets rich in vitamin A, their eyes were incapable of seeing through complete darkness or rain squalls where radar excelled. Lee had a deep understanding of this technology, having dedicated years to studying it since 1939, when most flag officers dismissed radar as experimental equipment with practical combat value. He read technical papers from the Naval Research Laboratory and visited contractors like Raytheon who were developing radar systems. During goodwill visits before World War II, he also examined British radar systems. Lee participated in Fleet Problem 20, where a prototype XF radar aboard battleship New York had detected simulated destroyer attacks at ranges that rendered traditional night tactics obsolete. While others clung to outdated methods, Lee envisioned the future role of radar in naval warfare. However, operators needed to be fully aware of the SG's critical limitations to avoid potentially fatal consequences. The radar system failed to distinguish between different targets accurately. At a distance, both destroyers and battleships appeared as indistinguishable green blips on the screen. Land formations such as Decisive Island cast radar shadows and blind spots. Turbulent seas also produced deceptive echoes that mimicked ship signatures. The equipment demanded continuous interpretation by skilled operators who were knowledgeable about both the technology's capabilities and naval strategy. A single misidentification or erroneous range estimation could result in American vessels maneuvering blindly into intense Japanese gunfire. As of November 1942, the United States Navy faced a critical issue. There was no established doctrine for employing radar guidance in surface combat at the Naval War College. No one had engaged in significant fleet battles, relying primarily on radar rather than visual sightings. The technology had been proven effective in limited engagements, yet the necessary institutional knowledge to use it efficiently remained absent. Experienced admirals like Daniel Callahan and Norman Scott commanded radar-equipped ships during earlier conflicts near Guadalcanal just a few days prior. Sadly, both perished. Rear Admiral Callahan led from his heavy cruiser, the San Francisco, during the chaotic night battle on November 12th and 13th. He positioned himself aboard a ship with powerful main batteries but inadequate radar antenna placement. His radar-equipped ships were stationed towards the rear of his formation, limiting their ability to relay crucial information quickly over radio lines overwhelmed by conflicting reports. During the intense 40-minute engagement that commenced at Azo 148 on November 13th, Callahan made critical tactical decisions based on incomplete visual data and educated guesses. Meanwhile, radar operators aboard other ships watched helplessly as enemy vessels maneuvered on their screens. Due to the inability to obtain precise information amid the chaos of close-quarters combat, Callahan succumbed to shells from Japanese battleships that struck San Francisco's bridge. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Rear Admiral Norman Scott had a somewhat better experience at the Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11th and 12th. His task force included ships with the new SG radar system, allowing his crews to detect the approaching Japanese fleet earlier. However, despite this advantage, Scott did not fully trust the radar contacts provided by these systems. His crew reported that he had paused to confirm his position visually, thereby wasting precious seconds. The ensuing battle deteriorated into a chaotic close-quarters fight, where luck and Japanese errors played larger roles than the systematic application of American technological advantages. Scott met his end on November 13th when an artillery shell struck Atlanta's bridge during the same engagement that took Callahan's life. He was also posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Both admirals showed remarkable personal bravery by leading from exposed positions, and both perished in similar circumstances. Their deaths underscored the harsh reality that courage alone was insufficient without a comprehensive understanding of technology. Simply possessing radar did not guarantee its effective use if commanders failed to grasp how to integrate into naval tactics. In November 1942, few within the United States Navy fully understood how to incorporate radar into surface combat strategies, with Willis Lee being one notable exception. Lee had been an ardent advocate for radar integration since 1940 and served as Director of Fleet Training. He personally participated in Fleet Problem 20 in February 1939 in the Caribbean, where experimental XF search radar on board battleship New York detected destroyers at a range of 15 nautical miles, effectively countering simulated torpedo attacks. Lee closely observed how radar gave defending ships substantial advance warning, rendering traditional night attack tactics obsolete. He delved deeply into fire control theory and mastered ballistics, trajectory mathematics, and electronic systems. He spent countless hours in radar plot rooms, learning the intricacies of interpreting returns correctly, distinguishing genuine contacts from atmospheric interference and sea clutter. Unlike many other flag officers who viewed radar as a specialized technical tool for enlisted personnel and junior officers to manage, Lee saw it as a transformative weapons system that he needed to master personally. Naval historians later noted that Lee possessed more knowledge about radar capabilities and limitations than most of the radar operators themselves. His understanding of tactical implications and strategic potential surpassed that of any other flag officer in the fleet. This expertise earned him command of Task Force 64, which comprised 2 battleships, Washington and South Dakota, as well as 4 destroyers for screening, with no cruisers, air cover, or reserve forces. Admiral William Hawley, overseeing South Pacific operations, had gathered every available resource after 3 intense days of combat around Guadalcanal. The Japanese were advancing once more with their most formidable surface fleet yet. This force was spearheaded by the fast battleship Kirishima, a veteran of Pearl Harbor and many other engagements, accompanied by heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, light cruisers Sai and Nagara, 9 destroyers, and an ample supply of Type 93 long lance torpedoes capable of sinking any American vessel within range. The Japanese aim remained the destruction of Henderson Field, a crucial landing strip captured by American Marines in August. Allied aircraft operating from this field had severely hindered Japanese resupply efforts and offered vital support to ground troops fighting on Guadalcanal. Should the Japanese succeed in destroying Henderson Field through naval bombardment, it would lead to the collapse of American control over Guadalcanal within weeks. Supply lines would be severed, leaving the Marines isolated and outnumbered, gradually succumbing to enemy forces. The outcome of 6 months of intense combat, involving thousands of casualties on both sides, hung in the balance. Japan could regain strategic dominance if they succeeded. Admiral Lee's directive was straightforward yet daunting: prevent the Japanese from achieving their objective. Hawley granted Lee complete autonomy in how to proceed and fight. There would be no interference or second guessing from higher command, only results mattered. If Lee triumphed, the campaign at Guadalcanal could continue, preserving America's tenuous hold on the island. Failure meant the fall of Guadalcanal and a resurgence of Japanese aggression. At 2:30 hours on November 14th, Washington's SG radar detected 2 columns of ships moving northwest at a distance of 18 Thallanset yards, traveling at 21 knots toward Savo Sound. This contact aligned with expected Japanese operational patterns and was promptly relayed to Admiral Lee's command bridge via a communication system he had personally redesigned. Typically, Naval protocol required radar operators to report findings to a talker who would then inform the bridge officer before relaying information up to the admiral for orders to be disseminated down the chain of command. The lengthy procedure ate up valuable seconds as enemy vessels closed in, positioning themselves for an attack and getting ready to unleash their firepower. Lee had circumvented conventional protocols by reinventing the communication system. The radar plot officer utilized a headset that linked him directly with the gunnery officer, the main battery plotting room, and each of the 3 primary director stations for the main guns. Upon detecting a target, radar operators could swiftly convey its position, bearing, range, and movement to all relevant personnel responsible for firing solutions. This setup eliminated communication lags, reduced misinterpretations that might arise from relaying information through multiple parties, and prevented crucial details from being lost or forgotten amid the chaos of battle. Despite breaching peacetime regulations and standard operating procedures, Lee pushed forward with this system because he recognized that in radar-directed combat, speed of information transmission was paramount for survival. Lee stood beside Captain Glenn Davis on the bridge, who was Washington's commanding officer. At 50 years old, Davis was a renowned ordnance specialist with extensive experience at the Naval Proving Ground, where he had worked on developing fire control systems for years. He possessed an in-depth knowledge of ballistics, trajectory calculations, shell flight time, and the intricate process of integrating radar range data into firing solutions. Lee and Davis had meticulously crafted Washington's radar-directed gunnery procedures during the ship's training exercises after entering the Pacific Theater. They pushed the crew through rigorous drills on radar operations and fire control coordination whenever schedules allowed. This night marked Washington's first combat encounter, as she had never fired her main battery at an enemy target before. Lee turned to Davis and uttered the words that would be documented in the after-action report, "Stand by, Glenn, they're here." Across Washington, an electronic chime rang out with 2 brief tones. To the crew, this signal conveyed a single message: the main battery was preparing to fire. Teams rushed to their battle stations, which they had practiced numerous times before. Damage control teams positioned themselves near vital areas, prepared to react immediately to any flooding or fire incidents. Inside the radar plot room, operators meticulously adjusted their equipment. The SG radar was displaying increasingly clear signals. Several contacts were beginning to form distinct clusters as the range decreased. One Japanese group was heading east of Tsavo Island, consisting of light cruiser Sendai and 3 destroyers. Another formation was approaching from the north, led by light cruiser Nagara with 6 accompanying destroyers. Meanwhile, the main striking force, comprising battleship Kirishima along with heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, sailed directly toward Henderson Field, following a predictable route between Tsavo Island and Guadalcanal. The Japanese fleet was unaware of Washington's presence. Reconnaissance aircraft had spotted Lee's ships earlier that day, but intelligence reports were conflicting and unclear. Some analysts believed they had detected cruisers and destroyers, while other reports hinted at the possibility of carriers. None correctly identified the 2 modern American battleships. This confusion was understandable given Japanese operational planning did not factor in the presence of American battleships operating within the restricted reef-strewn waters near Guadalcanal during nighttime hours. According to naval doctrine worldwide, battleships needed ample space to maneuver effectively and avoid torpedoes, as well as clear fields of fire for their guns. Tsavo Sound was narrow and treacherous, surrounded by reefs and littered with debris from previous engagements. The water was so contaminated with sunken vessels that magnetic compasses malfunctioned due to the sheer mass of steel wreckage lying on the seabed. Sailors had started referring to it as Ironbottom Sound. Despite its apparent unsuitability for battleship engagements, it was an ideal spot for radar-guided ambushes. At 2:30 17 hours, Washington's radar picked up Japanese screening forces approaching at a distance of 14,000 yards. The four American destroyers leading Admiral Azey's column, Walk Benham, Preston, and Gwyn, initiated the engagement by firing their 5-inch guns on the enemy destroyer screen, safeguarding Kondo's main force. Within minutes, the battle devolved into a chaotic melee. Japanese destroyers launched swarms of Type 93 long Lance torpedoes, the most advanced naval weapons at the time. The American destroyers desperately maneuvered to evade these unseen threats in the dark. Suddenly, one long lance struck Walker, the leading destroyer. The massive warhead obliterated her bow and set off her forward magazine, causing Walker to sink within minutes with most of its crew aboard. Preston sustained multiple hits from Japanese destroyers and cruisers, igniting into a ball of flames. Benham's bow was blown away by a torpedo strike, yet the after section remained afloat. Gwyn, the sole destroyer that emerged relatively unscathed, was instructed to withdraw, escorting the damaged Benham. Meanwhile, battleship South Dakota, trailing Washington in column formation, experienced a series of catastrophic electrical malfunctions that would significantly impact the battle's progression. Around 23:17 hours, improperly secured circuit breakers within an electrical switchboard failed due to shock vibrations from Turret 3's firing. By approximately 20:30 hours, a major cascading electrical failure rendered South Dakota's radar systems and fire control computers useless at a critical juncture. Partial power was restored by 23:58, but additional failures ensued shortly after as the main battery continued to fire, causing further disruptions. For crucial minutes during the decisive phase of the engagement, South Dakota's crew operated without radar guidance or effective gun control through their sophisticated fire control system. Compounding this issue was a navigational error. South Dakota neared the burning wreckage of the American destroyers that had been annihilated earlier. The cruiser Atago's searchlights revealed South Dakota's silhouette clearly. Virtually every Japanese vessel redirected their fire towards the illuminated battleship. Over several minutes, South Dakota endured 27 hits from both 14-inch and 8-inch shells. Fortunately for her crew, these rounds were high-explosive shells with impact fuses, primarily intended for shore bombardment rather than armor penetration. The blasts severely damaged South Dakota's superstructure, destroyed radar antennas, crippled fire control systems, destroyed communication equipment, and resulted in the deaths of 39 sailors. However, the ship's main armor belt remained unscathed by the high-explosive projectiles. At around midnight on November 15th, Captain Thomas Gatch decided that South Dakota could no longer effectively participate in the engagement. He sought permission from Admiral Lee to withdraw, which was immediately granted. South Dakota then retreated southward while her crew worked desperately to control fires and make emergency repairs. Now alone against the entire Japanese force, Washington found itself isolated but strategically positioned behind the blazing destroyer wrecks. This allowed Admiral Lee to use the fires as a protective screen, while the focus of Japanese firepower remained on South Dakota, unintentionally shielding Washington from detection. The Japanese, preoccupied with pounding the illuminated target, failed to spot Washington in the darkness. Utilizing precise radar tracking, Washington's operators monitored every Japanese vessel closely. Around midnight, SG radar indicated that Kirishima was within 400 yards, a range where Washington's powerful 16-inch guns could be devastatingly accurate. Given Washington's advanced fire control system, hitting targets at such close range was almost guaranteed. Captain Davis received the radar data and issued his orders accordingly. All main battery directors locked onto targets using radar bearings alone. The Mark-Calais fire control radar transmitted range and bearing data directly to analog fire control computers housed in the plotting rooms deep within Washington's armored hull. These computers automatically calculated trajectories, compensated for ship motion and target movement, factored in wind and air density, and computed shell flight times. 9 16-inch guns and 3 triple turrets swiveled smoothly toward targets that were invisible to gun crews. Every action was guided solely by radar data and calculating machines. No visual confirmation was possible, No searchlights were used to reveal Washington's position. There was no means to verify the existence of the targets except through firing and observing results. Exactly at midnight on November 15th, Washington commenced firing. The night sky lit up with blinding flashes as 9 16-inch shells, each weighing 2 700 pounds, were ejected from their barrels at a speed of 2 600 feet per second. The muzzle blast was so powerful that it knocked sailors off balance on the main deck. These projectiles streaked through the darkness toward the Japanese battleship Kirishima, which was out of sight at a range of 400 yards and could only be tracked by radar. The flight time was approximately 7 seconds. Multiple shells hit Kirishima's forward section, causing explosions near her bridge area. Forward 14-inch gun turrets fell silent as their crews were killed or incapacitated. Armor-piercing shells punched through the deck armor and detonated deep within the ship. The forward 14-inch magazines immediately flooded to prevent a catastrophic explosion. Hydraulic systems that powered the rear turrets failed, and steering mechanisms were damaged, forcing Kirishima into an uncontrollable slow circle to port. Fires broke out across her superstructure as Washington unleashed 75 rounds of 16-inch armor, piercing ammunition over 7 minutes of relentless gunfire. Different sources provide varying estimates for the exact number of hits, with American observers noting 9 impacts based on splash observations. However, many shells fell short and continued underwater at a shallow angle, striking below the waterline where they could not be observed. Lieutenant Commander Shiro Hayashi's Japanese damage control records indicate 20 major caliber hits. In 1992, marine archaeologist Dr. Robert Ballard discovered Kiroshima's wreck using deep-sea submersibles, confirming approximately 20 impacts from the 16-inch shells. Washington also fired 107 rounds of 5-inch secondary ammunition, with around 40 hitting Kiroshima's superstructure and causing severe damage. The hits shredded her pagoda foremast, destroyed fire control stations, killed personnel, and ignited fires that quickly spread out of control. Japanese officers on Kirishima's bridge were struggling to comprehend the situation as they observed muzzle flashes and felt the ship shudder from impacts. Damage reports flooded in from every compartment, magazine flooding, fires in the forward section, steering failure, water ingress into the engine room. Despite their efforts, the officers could not locate the source of the attacks, no searchlights revealed an enemy vessel, and visual sightings failed to identify Washington's position. The American battleship was firing under complete darkness with a weapon system that baffled and outmatched the Japanese forces. Captain Sanji Iwabuchi ordered Kirishima to return fire immediately, but found his fire control systems were unable to acquire a target. His optical rangefinders needed a visible target to gauge distance accurately. Lookouts spotted muzzle flashes but couldn't pinpoint precise range and bearing due to the darkness and smoke. His guns fired blindly in hopes of hitting their mark by chance. The 14-inch shells flew over Washington's superstructure, narrowly missing. The battle was overwhelmingly one-sided. Washington had a clear radar image of Kirishima, while the Japanese battleship could not detect her opponent at all. It felt like engaging an invisible foe. Each time the Japanese gunners thought they had pinpointed South Dakota's position based on muzzle flashes. Washington used radar data to predict and evade their aim. The Japanese were firing high explosive shells with impact fuses intended for shore bombardment of Henderson Field. This type of ammunition was far less effective against battleship armor compared to armor-piercing projectiles. When Kirishima and the cruisers hit South Dakota, they failed to penetrate her protective belt armor despite causing severe topside damage. Washington's rounds were specifically engineered to pierce heavy ship armor and explode inside enemy hulls. Many of these shells struck the water before reaching their targets, continuing underwater trajectories to impact below the waterline where armor was thinner for weight reduction purposes. These underwater hits caused devastating progressive flooding. Kirishima, well designed with extensive watertight compartments, would normally be hard to sink under normal circumstances, but could not survive 20 direct hits from Washington's 16-inch guns fired at point-blank range by a highly accurate fire control system. By the early morning hours of November 15th, Kirishima was effectively out of action, dead in the water, and listing 18 Edwards to starboard with uncontrollable fires raging, flooded magazines, and more than 2 to 12 crew members either dead or mortally wounded. Captain Iwabuchi lost control over the steering mechanisms, causing the ship to circle aimlessly. Japanese destroyers Asagumo and Samadare tried their best to tow Kirishima, but her damage was too extensive. The flooding worsened, making it impossible to stabilize the vessel. By Zotan 325 on November 15th, Captain Iwabuchi gave the order to abandon ship. A total of 1198 crew members were rescued by Japanese destroyers before Kirishima capsized and sank in Ironbottom Sound, 7.5 miles northwest of Tsavo Island, adding another wreck to the underwater graveyard. Admiral Kondo's bombardment mission was a failure. Without Kirishima's heavy artillery support, Henderson Field's runway remained undamaged. Consequently, he ordered his remaining vessels to retreat at full speed. Japanese destroyers launched torpedoes at Washington as cover for their withdrawal, but all missed their targets. Utilizing radar to track the torpedo wakes and calculate evasive maneuvers, Washington successfully avoided them. Admiral Lee decided against pursuing further into potentially hostile waters where additional enemy submarines or surface forces might be lurking. With this, the battle concluded, ensuring Henderson Field's survival and safeguarding supplies for the Marines stationed at Guadalcanal. The actions of Washington and Lee would resonate throughout the remainder of the Pacific War, fundamentally altering naval warfare tactics. For the first time, an American commander had demonstrated that radar fire control could achieve a decisive victory against a skilled adversary in a major surface engagement. This technological advantage underscored the importance of employing advanced systems to overcome numerical disadvantages and traditional tactical strengths. Within weeks following the battle, every admiral in the Pacific requested radar-equipped ships and trained operators for these innovative systems. Admiral Chester Nimitz, overseeing the Pacific Fleet, issued urgent orders to expedite the installation of radar on all combat vessels. Training initiatives were swiftly set up at Pearl Harbor on the West Coast and later expanded to dedicated facilities in Hollywood, Florida. Radar operators, previously regarded as secondary technical specialists, suddenly found themselves indispensable, their expertise becoming crucial for determining the outcome of battles. The development of Combat Information Centers, CIC, was directly inspired by lessons learned during the Guadalcanal campaign. Prior to this battle, radar data was dispersed throughout a ship, with operators in the radar room relaying contacts to the bridge and gun directors receiving information separately. There was no central location where all data could be gathered, analyzed, and disseminated effectively. Admiral Nimitz and his staff quickly identified this shortcoming upon reviewing Lee's action reports. By spring 1943, American ships were being retrofitted with dedicated CICs, dark rooms located deep within the vessel where radar displays, radio communications, and plotting tables were centralized. Officers in these centers could now see the entire tactical situation, correlate data from various sources, and provide commanders with a comprehensive overview of the battle. This was groundbreaking. For the first time, naval commanders had access to real-time information about both friendly and enemy forces, enabling them to track movements accurately, predict intentions, and issue commands based on complete intelligence rather than fragmented reports or assumptions. The CIC concept soon spread across the entire fleet. By 1944, every American warship boasted a functional combat information center staffed by officers specifically trained for this role, including radar interpretation, air defense coordination, fighter direction, and navigation support. The CIC became as crucial to ship operations in combat as the bridge or engine room. This organizational innovation, derived from Lee's effective use of radar at Guadalcanal, provided American forces with a decisive tactical edge in subsequent Pacific battles. The psychological impact on Japanese naval forces was equally profound and strategically pivotal. For 2 years following Pearl Harbor, Japanese ships had dominated night surface combat due to superior training, optical equipment, and aggressive tactics honed over many years of preparation. Their lookouts, chosen for their exceptional eyesight and trained extensively in night vision techniques, could spot American vessels first in the darkness. Their torpedoes, Model 93 Long Lancers propelled by oxygen and silent running, were capable of sinking targets from distances greater than 20,000 yards, far surpassing the range of American torpedoes. Japanese tactics focused on swift offensive maneuvers, leveraging their agility and firepower to close in rapidly on adversaries. This approach had yielded a string of triumphs. In August, during the battle at Tezo Island, American forces suffered a crushing defeat with 4 heavy cruisers sunk within an hour. The engagement at Cape Esperance was inconclusive, while the first naval battle near Guadalcanal proved to be brutal and costly for both sides. However, radar-enabled fire control systems neutralized Japan's conventional advantages. Admiral Kondo submitted meticulously detailed after-action reports soon after withdrawing from the Battle of Guadalcanal. Japanese staff officers interviewed survivors from Kirishima about their experiences during the conflict. These accounts painted a grim picture for the Japanese naval leadership. American vessels managed to detect Kondo's fleet and initiate precise attacks even before any visual contact was made by Japanese lookouts. Despite heavy smoke and darkness, American shells landed with remarkable accuracy. Traditional evasive tactics that had previously confused American gunners proved ineffective against an enemy that could seemingly track ship movements through the night without visible means. Kondo accurately deduced that the Americans possessed a technological edge that rendered years of Japanese tactical refinement and training obsolete. His reports meticulously described instances where American ships appeared to fire randomly into the darkness yet achieved accurate hits. As an experienced and astute officer, Kondo understood that superior seamanship alone did not explain his force's defeat. There was an unidentified factor at play that he recognized as a fundamental game changer. Japanese naval intelligence urgently worked to unravel this mystery, gathering scattered reports about American radar technology from various sources. Intelligence was gathered from documents seized aboard damaged American vessels, as well as through interrogations of captured U.S. soldiers. Most prisoners were unaware of technical radar details beyond knowing that their ships were equipped with radar systems. Japanese spies operating in neutral nations also collected information by examining technical journals and patent applications. None of these intelligence sources provided a comprehensive understanding of the extent to which the Americans had integrated radar into combat operations or how significant this technological advantage was. Japan possessed its own radar research initiatives, but they had been assigned lower priority compared to other weapon development efforts. Despite having a grasp of radio detection principles, Japanese scientists and engineers were behind their American and British counterparts by several years in terms of practical applications. This lag could be attributed to various factors. For instance, Japan's naval strategy focused on offensive operations rather than defensive measures like radar systems. Additionally, the country's limited industrial capacity forced difficult decisions about which technologies to prioritize. The production of radar systems demanded high-precision manufacturing, quality electronics components, and skilled technicians. Resources that were scarce in Japan due to its strained industrial base, already overburdened with multiple weapon programs. Consequently, Japan's radar development could not match the scale of American industrial output. By 1944, Japanese ships began receiving functional fire control radar, but by then the strategic landscape had shifted dramatically against them. Meanwhile, American shipyards were producing new vessels equipped with advanced radar technology at a rapid pace, often adding 1 new ship each month to their fleet. In contrast, Japanese shipbuilding facilities struggled merely to replace sunk ships, following significant losses. The battleship hit on November 13th and Kirishima on November 15th within just 3 days, along with the heavy cruiser Kinugasa earlier in the campaign. Japan ceased major naval reinforcement efforts at Guadalcanal. The strategic equation had fundamentally changed, as American industrial capacity far exceeded Japan's ability to recover or reinforce its naval strength. They had suffered significant losses, including several destroyers and the sinking of light cruiser Ura. The cumulative toll was immense, representing years of effort in construction and training that couldn't be swiftly replenished. Japanese naval leadership, upon reviewing casualty reports and damage assessments, reached a grim conclusion. They could no longer afford to exchange capital ships for uncertain tactical benefits. More crucially, despite numerous efforts, their operational objective remained unachieved. Henderson Field continued to operate, with aircraft intercepting Japanese convoys and bombing enemy positions. American Marines maintained control over the airfield and its surrounding areas. Supply ships arrived at Guadalcanal during daylight hours, protected by the aircraft from Henderson Field. The Japanese forces on Guadalcanal received neither reinforcements nor supplies as promised. They found themselves isolated, gradually succumbing to starvation and disease more rapidly than combat with American troops allowed. Through painful experiences, Japanese naval commanders learned that American radar rendered night surface engagements perilously dangerous. Traditional tactical advantages honed over years of training no longer assured victory. Superior optical equipment could not match the capabilities of American electronic systems. The emphasis on aggressive offensive tactics and decisive confrontations required fundamental revision in doctrine. However, such changes took time, a luxury Japan did not possess. Consequently, Japanese naval strategy shifted to a more defensive posture around Guadalcanal. Plans for major surface battles were abandoned. Instead, they initiated high-speed destroyer runs, referred to as Tokyo Express, by Americans or Rat Run by the Japanese themselves. These fast squadrons would dash down from Rabaul under cover of darkness, approach Guadalcanal at maximum speed, unload supplies in sealed drums that drifted ashore, and then withdraw before dawn when Henderson Field's aircraft could attack. These supply runs provided barely any necessities for the 17,000 remaining Japanese troops on the island, far from sufficient to support them over the long term. Despite this scarcity, destroyer operations continued as Japan's only viable option following the loss of Hii and Kirishima. The campaign persisted into December and extended well into January 1943, with Japanese soldiers at Guadalcanal fighting tenaciously despite worsening circumstances that rendered their situation increasingly dire. Hunger was rampant among them, while diseases such as malaria, dysentery, and tropical infections decimated their ranks. Medical provisions were exhausted, and food supplies dwindled to virtually nothing. In desperation, troops scavenged the jungle for sustenance, consuming roots, leaves, or any other edible items they could find. Some units resorted to cannibalism under extreme duress. Although American Marines also endured illnesses and fatigue, their supply lines through Henderson Field kept them well provisioned, allowing them to steadily expand their perimeter and push back Japanese forces. In late January and early February 1943, Japan executed a proficient evacuation operation that managed to rescue about 11,000 soldiers from Guadalcanal's shores using destroyer runs. The initial success of this operation was due to American commanders not recognizing it as an evacuation attempt, but instead perceiving it as another reinforcement effort. However, the successful evacuation did little to alter the overall strategic outcome. Japan had suffered a decisive defeat, losing 24,000 soldiers on Guadalcanal primarily to starvation and disease. Moreover, they lost dozens of aircraft and crucial naval assets, including 2 battleships, several cruisers, and numerous destroyers in battles around the island. While American losses were significant, their casualties could be replenished more easily than Japan's irreplaceable military resources. The campaign effectively concluded when Washington destroyed Kirishima. U.S. Marines maintained control of Henderson Field, enabling American supply ships to safely arrive on the island during daylight hours under the protection of the field's fighter aircraft. Stranded and gradually starving, Japanese ground troops were evacuated in February 1943 through a well-executed withdrawal that saved lives but conceded an overwhelming strategic defeat. From then on, Japan was confined to defensive operations, ceding territory in exchange for time, all while hoping for a diplomatic resolution that never materialized. The naval engagement at Guadalcanal is widely regarded as the pivotal moment of the Pacific War. Prior to November 1942, Japanese forces had been pressing their advance across the region. Post-November, they began retreating and were unable to reclaim strategic dominance. While factors like ship numbers, aircraft capabilities, and industrial output played significant roles, it was the adept integration of radar technology that ultimately tipped the scales. This advantage was capitalized upon by one side while the other failed to comprehend its full potential. Admiral Lee earned the Navy Cross for his leadership during November 14th and 15th, praised particularly for his superior use of radar and bold tactics against a numerically larger Japanese fleet. Similarly, Captain Davis received the same commendation for his exceptional ship handling and fire control coordination amid intense combat conditions. In contrast, the radar operators who contributed to the victory went unheralded in official accolades. Their achievements were merely documented in Washington's crew lists and casualty reports, with no additional recognition. Admiral Lee continued overseeing fast battleships around 1943 and 1944. He spearheaded shore bombardment missions against Japanese, held islands to facilitate marine landings, and commanded the battleship escort screen for carrier task forces as they launched air strikes across the Pacific theater. He instructed new officers arriving at the fleet on radar tactics and the incorporation of technology into combat operations. In March 1944, Lee was elevated to Vice Admiral and appointed as commander of the Pacific Fleet's battleships. His expertise and successful combat history were well recognized. By May 1945, with victory over Japan becoming imminent, Lee was dispatched to the Atlantic to oversee research on defenses against kamikaze aircraft, a Japanese suicide tactic that had caused significant casualties among American ships during the Okinawa campaign. On August 25, 1945, 10 days after Japan's surrender and the conclusion of World War II, Vice Admiral Willis Augustus Lee suffered an abrupt heart attack while being transported to his flagship in Casco Bay, Maine. He succumbed before medical help arrived at the age of 57. His obituary highlighted his Olympic gold medals in shooting and his command during the naval Battle of Guadalcanal. It also noted his contributions to naval gunnery and tactics. However, it did not underscore that he was the first American admiral to prove conclusively that radar could transform surface warfare, thereby altering naval combat forever. Captain Glenn Davis stayed with the Navy after the war ended. He commanded battleship divisions during the post-war era. He served as commander of the Washington Navy Yard and superintendent of the Naval Gun Factory. He retired as a vice admiral in 1953. Following his retirement, Davis worked in the civilian shipping industry for many years, served on corporate boards, and authored technical articles about naval gunnery for professional journals. In each article he wrote, Davis repeatedly emphasized the importance of radar to younger officers. He stressed that having advanced technology was meaningless without the proper training and proficiency to use it effectively. He insisted that possessing equipment did not equate to knowing how to exploit it tactically. He maintained that Navy had triumphed at Guadalcanal because a dedicated group of officers and enlisted personnel had diligently mastered a revolutionary system, while most of the fleet remained skeptical of the technology and awaited official guidance. Most of the radar operators, who played a crucial role in securing victory, returned to civilian life, found employment, raised families, and seldom spoke about their wartime experiences in depth. Operating radar was seen as a technical skill rather than a combat function worthy of medals or recognition. The accolades were reserved for officers who made strategic decisions, gunners who operated the weapons, and damage control teams that salvaged damaged vessels. In 1942, no one awarded medals to individuals who monitored electronic screens and communicated range and bearing data. Yet these numbers determined whether shells hit their targets or missed, whether ships remained afloat or sank, and ultimately whether sailors survived or perished. The SG radar used by Washington's operators during the Guadalcanal operation is now part of the Smithsonian Institution's collection, displayed alongside other World War II naval equipment in its exhibit. The museum plaque highlights that this particular radar was utilized in the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, noting Admiral Lee's significant triumph, but failing to mention the radar operators whose expertise and training were instrumental in achieving it. Their contributions remain largely unnoticed by visitors and historians. This scenario illustrates how innovation often occurs during wartime through individual efforts rather than formal channels or planned programs. It was individuals like Admiral Willis Lee who recognized the potential of radar when many other admirals dismissed it as an unreliable gadget who drove progress forward. Similarly, figures such as Captain Glenn Davis, who adapted communication protocols to incorporate radar data into fire control systems, also played pivotal roles. Then there were the unnamed radar operators whose meticulous work translating patterns on glowing screens into critical targeting information led to a battleship being sunk within 7 minutes of radar-guided gunfire. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal demonstrated conclusively that having superior information was the key factor in naval power during the 20th century. The ability to see further, respond quicker, and coordinate more efficiently ensured victory regardless of numerical superiority or conventional firepower advantages. The Japanese only realized this too late. By the time they understood what American radar could achieve, U.S. shipyards were producing radar-equipped ships at a pace unmatched by their counterparts in Japan. The technological divide widened into an industrial chasm that ultimately solidified as an unassailable strategic edge. However, in November 1942, the outcome of the Pacific War was still uncertain and not set in stone. Japanese battleships could have successfully destroyed Henderson Field, potentially leading to a loss at the Guadalcanal Canal and forcing American forces to withdraw. The Marines might have been cut off and defeated, allowing Japan to reclaim the strategic initiative for years. This grim scenario did not materialize due to anything beyond human control or divine intervention. Instead, it was because of 7 minutes of radar-directed naval artillery fire carried out by dedicated officers and crew who had spent countless hours mastering a cutting-edge system that was largely untrusted and misunderstood within the fleet. If you found this narrative as captivating as we did, please give us a thumbs up to help spread more underappreciated stories from World War II. Your support enables us to continue sharing such overlooked histories. Subscribe to stay updated with these forgotten narratives. Each story holds significance and deserves remembrance. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below, including where you are watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, uniting veterans and history buffs alike. Thank you for joining us and helping keep these stories alive.